My name is Rosalind Hartwell. I am 71 years old, and I built Hartwell Estate Wines out of 11 dusty acres and a bank loan nobody wanted to give a woman in 1974. Last autumn, at the 50th anniversary gala for the vineyard I bled to create, my only daughter stood up in front of 300 guests, lifted a glass of my own reserve, and toasted to my well-earned retirement. She smiled at me while she said it. She had no idea I had spent the previous 6 weeks reading every single email between her husband, and his mother. The 3 people who had already booked me a room in a memory care facility 3 hours north and forged the paperwork to put me there. That night I raised my glass right back. I let them believe they had won. Then I signed a document that handed them the crown jewel of my estate. A vineyard I knew was worth less than the dirt under my shoes, wrapped in enough hidden liability to bury all 3 of them. Before I tell you how a confused old woman dismantled the people who tried to erase her, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. And if you've ever had someone mistake your kindness for weakness, hit that like button. You'll want to see how this ends. It was a Thursday in late September, and the harvest smell was everywhere. Crushed grapes, cool earth, oak smoke drifting from the barrel room. I was standing on the terrace of the main house, watching the pickers move through the north rows in the last of the light, when I decided to call my daughter. Her name is Vivian. She is 42, my chief of operations, and for most of her life she was the only family I had left after her father passed. I dialed her number and let it ring while I turned the stem of an empty glass in my fingers. She answered on the 4th ring, and I heard it immediately. That little exhale, the sound a person makes when they've decided in advance that a conversation is a burden. "Viv," I said, keeping my voice warm. "The last of the estate fruit comes in tomorrow, 50 years to the week since I planted the first vines. I thought the 2 of us could open the 89 reserve tonight. Just us, sit on the terrace like we used to." There was a pause, and then a heavy theatrical sigh. "Mom, I would love to, I really would. But the county sent back the water use filings for the whole estate, and if I don't have corrections in by Monday, we lose the irrigation permits for the entire east block. I'm buried. I'm going to be at the office until midnight staring at spreadsheets." I closed my eyes. There was a small ache in my chest, the particular ache only a mother knows, the disappointment you swallow because you've been swallowing it for years. But underneath it, I felt something like pride. If she was staying late to protect the estate, how could I fault her for that? I built Hartwell so that she would never know what it felt like to lose everything. In the early years, I lived in the barrel room through 2 winters because I couldn't afford both the mortgage and the heating. I picked my own fruit until my hands cracked. I learned the water rights and the tax codes by lamplight because I couldn't afford a lawyer to read them for me. If my daughter was working late to protect that, I could forgive one missed dinner. "I understand," I told her. "The permits come first. Don't burn yourself out. We'll do the reserve this weekend." "You're the best, Mom. I'll make it up to you. Happy almost 50 years. And the line went dead. I stood on the terrace a while longer, 50 years. You expect that kind of milestone to be full of noise, family, laughter, the proof of a life well spent. Instead, I had the hum of the crush pad and a single empty glass. I decided I was not going to spend that evening alone in a dark house. I would drive into town, to Almeira's, the little restaurant on the square where I had celebrated every good vintage for 30 years, where they knew my name and kept a corner table with a view of the fountain. The owner met me at the door with both hands out. "Senora Hartwell, we were not expecting the whole party until later. Your table is being set now." I stopped. "My party? See, your daughter reserved the private room an hour ago for 6. She said it was a celebration." He beamed, entirely unaware that he had just cracked my world down the middle. I did not ask him to lead the way. I walked through the main room on my own, past the fountain, toward the frosted glass doors of the private dining room. Every step felt heavier than the last, and then I heard her laugh, bright, loud, completely unburdened. I stopped just short of the doorway in the shadow of a pillar, and I looked. Vivian was not buried in water filings. She was seated at the head of a long table, in a dress I had never seen, laughing with her whole body. Beside her sat her husband, Marcus, smooth-tanned, the kind of handsome that had never once been tested by hardship. And across from them, holding court, was Marcus's mother, Camille. I had never warmed to Camille. From the day Vivian married Marcus, Camille had treated my life's work like an inheritance she was simply waiting to collect. She wore too much jewelry and spoke about my vineyard as though she'd planted it herself. She made small, sharp comments about how a mother who truly loved her daughter would sign more of the estate over already. The table was covered in extravagance. A magnum of my own Hartwell reserve, the 50-year library bottle, one of only 12 left in the world, sat open and half-poured. Platters of oysters, a tower of prawns, and the 3 of them were toasting. I stood in the dark and I listened. To the smoothest transition in the valley, Camille said, lifting her glass. By spring, that letterhead won't say Rosalind anymore. It'll say Vivian. Marcus laughed. Assuming the old girl even notices. She's so busy fussing over her precious vines she hasn't looked at a real balance sheet in a year. And then my daughter giggled and said, God, don't remind me. Half the time I tell her the numbers, I just make them up. She nods along. She has no idea what's actually happening in her own company. They burst out laughing, all three of them. It was a cruel, easy practice sound, the sound of people who had said these things many times before. I waited for one shred of defense, one flicker of the girl I raised. It never came, and here is the strange thing. The ache in my chest, that soft motherly ache, it didn't grow, it vanished. In its place came something cold and very clear. I had spent 5 decades across the table from bankers, distributors, and men who tried to buy my land out from under me. I know exactly what a predator looks like. I had simply never expected to find 3 of them at a dinner table, feeding off my life and laughing at my name. I did not turn around. I did not go home to cry. I stepped out of the shadow and walked directly to their table. I stopped 2 feet from the head of the table and let my shadow fall across the white linen. Marcus saw me first. The color drained from his face so fast I almost admired it. Vivian followed his eyes, and her laugh died in her throat with an audible click. Camille was last. She lowered a prawn halfway to her mouth and simply froze, her jaw slightly open. For a long moment no one spoke. The fountain murmured beyond the doors. Mom, Vivian finally managed. Her voice was tiny. What are you doing here? It's the 50th harvest, Vivian, I said. My voice was steady and completely without warmth. I came to have a quiet glass alone. Since you were buried under water permits until midnight. The lie tumbled out of her before she could stop it. This isn't, Mom, this is a distributor dinner. Marcus's mother has a contact who wants to carry us in 3 new states. We're pitching. I was going to bring you the whole proposal Monday. I looked at the table. There were no proposals, no numbers, no folders. There was a 50-year library bottle of my own wine, opened without asking, and the ruins of a feast. Sitting on the bread plate nearest to Camille, holding down the check, was a matte black metal card. The Hartwell Estate corporate card. I reached out slowly. No one moved. I picked it up. It was heavier than I remembered. And for one heartbeat, I was not in that restaurant at all. I was 29 years old in the winter of 1976, sleeping on a cot in the barrel room because the house wasn't built yet, waking to ice on the inside of the windows, washing my face in the same trough where I rinsed the fermentation tanks. Walking into bank after bank the next morning to beg for one more season. I looked at my daughter. I did not raise my voice. Quiet authority frightens people far more than shouting ever will. You should have been reading water permits, I said. And I gripped the card in both hands and snapped it clean in half. I set the 2 pieces gently on Camille's plate. Happy anniversary to me, I said. The bill is yours tonight. Then I turned and walked out into the cool square, past the fountain, and I did not look back. I did not sleep that night. I sat in my study with a glass of water I never drank, and I did the thing my daughter believed I could no longer do. I thought. Because the more I turned it over, the more I understood that a $4,000 dinner was not the disease. It was a single symptom. A person does not casually swipe a corporate card for a feast in a public restaurant in front of witnesses, unless they have already grown certain that no one is checking the statements anymore. You don't start bold, you start small, you test the fence. Only when the alarm never sounds do you throw a party. And Vivian had said something that would not leave me. Half the time I just make the numbers up, she nods along. She thought I was blind. She thought that because I had stepped back from the daily books to spend my last good years among the vines, I had lost my edge. That the vault was standing open and unguarded. At 6 in the morning I called the one person who has stood at my shoulder through every real war this estate ever fought. My attorney, Daniel Okonkwo. Daniel is careful, brilliant, and ruthless when he needs to be. He answered on the second ring, fully alert, because he knew that if I was calling before dawn, the sky was falling. I told him everything. The lie, the dinner, the toast, the card. He was silent until I finished, then let out one slow breath. I told him what I needed. Not the internal accountants. I wanted them nowhere near this. I wanted an outside forensic review of every transaction Vivian had authorized in the last 24 months. Every vendor, every invoice, every card. And I wanted the estate's server access quietly locked down under the cover of a routine security upgrade, so that no one, including my daughter, would know anyone was looking. Daniel warned me it could take days. I told him to bring me whatever he had by noon. Vivian came to my office at 9:15, still in yesterday's clothes, carrying 2 coffees and the perfect expression of an exhausted, remorseful daughter. Mom, she said, setting a cup in front of me, I need to apologize, I lied to you. There were no water permits. I'm so sorry. I folded my hands. Go on, it was Camille. She shook her head, the picture of despair. You know how she gets when she's in town. She demanded a nice dinner. She wouldn't take no for an answer, and Marcus won't stand up to her. I told them it was our anniversary week. I told them I should be with you. But she threw a fit and I panicked. I didn't want you to feel like you came second to my in-laws on your special week, so I made up the permits. It was cowardly. I hate myself for it. It was a beautiful performance. If I had not stood in that doorway and heard her say she invents my numbers to my face, I would have believed every word. She painted herself as the peacemaker crushed between a monstrous mother-in-law and a mother she only wanted to protect. She placed every ounce of blame on other people. And the corporate card? I asked softly. Her eyes dropped. Another mistake. Camille ordered half the cellar before I could stop her. The bill was insane. I didn't have that kind of cash in my personal account, so I used the estate card. I was going to reimburse it this morning, I swear. I stood, walked around the desk, and placed a warm hand on her shoulder. I dug very deep to find that warmth. Vivian, you should have just told me. Marriage is compromise. If you had to keep the peace with Camille, I understand more than you know. The relief that washed over her face was immediate, and honestly, a little sickening. But we run a business. A legacy. Reimburse the account by Friday, and we'll put this behind us. We'll do the reserve this weekend, just us. Thank you, Mom. No more lies. I'm gonna make you proud. I know you will. She left with a spring in her step, certain she'd manage the confused old woman one more time. I picked up the coffee she'd brought, walked to the potted olive tree by the window, and poured it into the soil. I would not accept a peace offering bought with my own stolen money. Daniel arrived at noon through the side entrance, carrying a folder 6 inches thick. He did not look like a man who'd had a good morning. It's worse than a dinner, he said, and slid a spreadsheet across my desk. The $4,000 restaurant bill was at the very bottom of the page. Next to everything above it, it was a rounding error. Over 18 months, Vivian had personally authorized just over $960,000 in payments to a single outside vendor, a brand and heritage consultancy called Meridian Seller Group. The name meant nothing to me. I have known every serious marketing house, every label designer, every distributor in this valley for 40 years. Meridian was a ghost. I asked Daniel for the vendor file. I opened the service agreements and started to read, and I want to tell you, building an estate from 11 acres does not happen unless you learn to read the fine print. I taught myself contract law at a kitchen table, because I couldn't afford anyone to do it for me. These documents were an insult. The language was sloppy, generic, copied from some free template online. There were no deliverables, no defined campaigns, no deadlines, no metrics. The scope of work said things like ambient brand stewardship and heritage narrative alignment. You do not pay nearly $1 million for heritage narrative alignment. Where's the actual work, Daniel? I asked, keeping my voice very quiet. If we paid these people almost $1 million, there should be a mountain of campaigns. Ad buys, label designs, something. That's the worst part, he said. There's nothing. I got into the project drives. There are no files associated with Meridian. Only vague monthly invoices, every one of them approved and fast-tracked by Vivian personally. I set the papers down. My daughter was not merely entitled, she was stealing, systematically. Draining the estate that fed my workers and secured my legacy, one fabricated invoice at a time. Who's behind Meridian? I asked. Follow the money. Daniel exhaled. It's a shell, incorporated 14 months ago. No office, just a registered agent and a mailbox 2 towns over. No website, no other clients. It exists for one reason, to build Hartwell Estate. He paused. And the sole owner of record is a man named Gerald Fontaine. He's a retired auto parts salesman. He's also Camille's brother. The pieces slammed together. My daughter wasn't just paying a fake vendor. She was funneling my capital straight into her mother-in-law's family, and from that shell, Daniel showed me, the money moved on. Chartered flights, custom jewelry, a leased villa on the coast. They were bleeding my life's work to fund a lifestyle. I closed my eyes. I thought of Vivian at 7, running through the young vines with purple-stained hands, desperate to make me proud. I wondered where that child had gone. Then the grief burned off, and what was left was very cold and very clear. I reached for the phone. That's enough. Call your contacts at the State Financial Crimes Unit. I want this reported today. Daniel put his hand flat over the receiver. Wait. I stared at him. Reporting the embezzlement now would be a mistake, he said quietly. He reached into his bag, not for more bank statements, but for a single sealed envelope, taped shut with red tape, which he set down as gently as if it might detonate. Last night, the security team went deeper into Vivian's private drive, looking for more shell companies. They found something that has nothing to do with wine. My heart began to pound. I broke the seal. Inside was a single wire transfer confirmation, $50,000, not to Meridian, not offshore. It went to a private medical practice in the city, the office of a prominent, discreet geriatric psychiatrist named Dr. Alan Reeve. Why, I asked, would my daughter wire $50,000 of stolen money to a brain doctor? Am I sick? Is Vivian sick? Daniel shook his head slowly. They've been monitoring the emails attached to that transfer, Rosalind. It isn't a medical payment. It's a bribe. Vivian, Marcus, and Camille are paying Dr. Reeve to falsify your mental health records. The room seemed to lose all its air. Daniel brought in a specialist, a former state cyber analyst named Priya, who now worked the quiet gray edges of corporate disputes. For 6 hours she worked at my conference table, while the sun went down, and at 9:15 that night she leaned back and turned her screen toward me. She had recovered 51 emails and 3 attachments. The subject lines were harmless: estate transition, heritage review. The contents were the blueprint for my erasure. The earliest chain was started by Camille. She had discovered something buried in my life that I had almost forgotten. A decade earlier, worried about exactly the kind of sudden illness that had taken my late husband, I had signed a family trust with an incapacity clause. It stated plainly that if I were ever certified by a licensed physician as mentally unfit to manage my affairs, control of the estate and my personal guardianship would pass automatically to my named successor, my daughter. I had written that clause to protect myself. They were going to use it to bury me. The emails laid out every step. Dr. Reeve carried a gambling debt and needed untraceable cash. Camille knew it. Marcus made the approach. $50,000 up front through the Meridian shell, with the promise of $200,000 more once the paperwork was complete. Then Priya opened the first attachment and I saw my own name at the top of a medical file. It was a flawless forgery, a full psychiatric and neurological evaluation complete with fabricated test scores, describing a woman in rapid cognitive decline, memory loss, confusion, diminished capacity to manage complex financial matters. Dr. Reeve had signed it with his official seal, formally declaring me unfit to run my company or my own life. But the theft of the estate was not the darkest part. The last thread was between Camille and Vivian, about what came after. Camille wrote that they could not simply retire me and leave me in my own home. I was too connected, too sharp, too dangerous. If I kept access to my lawyers and my contacts, I might demand a second opinion and expose everything. She had a solution: a private memory care facility 3 hours north, run by a personal associate, where the doors locked from the outside and contact with the world was restricted for the patient's safety. Once the trust triggered, my daughter would hold full guardianship. She could sign me in against my will, in the middle of the night, and there would be nothing I could do. Vivian's reply was 2 lines. She confirmed the doctor had delivered the final paperwork. "The trap is set," she wrote. "We should celebrate." And there it was. I sat back in my chair and I understood finally what I had walked into at that restaurant. The oysters, the library bottle, the toast to my retirement. They had not been celebrating a distributor. They had been celebrating this. The completed forgery. The paperwork that would let them lock me away and carve up 50 years of my life. My daughter had raised a glass of my own wine to my disappearance and called me a confused old woman who invented her own numbers because she truly believed she had already won. Priya, who had seen a great deal of ugliness in her work, looked genuinely disturbed. Daniel asked me how I wanted to proceed. He said we had enough tonight to send agents to all 3 homes and have every one of them arrested by morning. I looked at the forged diagnosis with my name on it, and the tears I expected simply did not come. "No," I said. "Not yet. Arresting them now is too merciful. They spent months digging my grave. I am going to make absolutely certain they are the ones who fall into it." Here is what I understood that Daniel, in his lawful, orderly mind, did not want to accept. If I called the authorities that night, Vivian would hire the best defense money my money could buy. She would drag it out for years, plead down to a white-collar charge, and serve a soft 18 months somewhere with a tennis court. Marcus would divorce her and vanish with whatever was hidden. Camille would weep to anyone who'd listen that she was the real victim. They would survive. I did not want them to survive. I wanted them dismantled, every luxury gone, every door in this valley closed to them, their names turned into a synonym for failure. To do that, I could not merely stop their plan. I had to let it run. I had to let them commit to it fully and publicly, and I had to give them a rope long enough to hang all 3 at once. So for the next 8 days, I gave a performance. I began to forget things. I called my assistant of 20 years by the wrong name. In a strategy meeting, I asked Vivian to repeat the same figures 3 times, rubbing my temples, murmuring that the numbers wouldn't hold still today. I left the wall safe in my office ajar when I knew Marcus was coming, so he could glimpse the ledgers inside and feel certain the fortress was unguarded. I misplaced a contract and blamed myself loudly, then found it an hour later, flustered and apologetic. Every mistake was deliberate, and every one of them fed the story Vivian was so desperate to build. Priya's surveillance confirmed it was working. The texts between Vivian and Marcus were giddy. Vivian bragged that the stress was accelerating my condition. that she hardly needed Dr. Reeves' file anymore because I was proving their case for them. Emboldened, she stopped covering her tracks, pushed larger Meridian invoices through, sloppily, certain the confused old woman would never check a routing log again. They dropped their guard completely, which was exactly what I needed. On the Monday before the anniversary gala, the event where the estates board and every major distributor in the region would gather, and where I now knew Vivian intended to present the forged diagnosis and invoke the trust, I called her into my office. I had drawn the blinds. I had left a prescription bottle on the desk where she'd see it. I let my voice waver. "Viv," I said, "sit down. I need to talk to you about the future." She leaned in, practically vibrating. "This last month has been hard. I've made mistakes. My memory. It isn't what it was. I think you already know that. Mom, it's okay. I'm ready to carry this for you. I know you are." I slid a bound portfolio across the desk. "Which is why I want you to have something, before the gala, before I step back." Inside was the prospectus for an acquisition. Solara Coast Cellars, a mid-size rival label 2 valleys over, a beautiful, established brand with national shelf placement. The price to acquire it outright was $15 million. On paper, it was a jewel, the kind of deal Hartwell would normally absorb without blinking. "I don't want the estate to buy it," I said. "I want you to. Under your own holding company, separate from Hartwell. My mind isn't reliable anymore, Viv. If I make a catastrophic mistake, I don't want it touching the main company. Hold Solara yourself. Hartwell will guarantee the financing. Consider it your early inheritance." She stared at the cover. She was a thief, but not a stupid one. "Why keep it separate? Why not fold it into Hartwell?" I gave her a sad, defeated smile. "Because if I lose my grip and drag the estate down, I want Solara safe in your hands, walled off from me. Hartwell backs the loan. You risk nothing. You simply sign as owner and reap the profit." I framed it as a dying woman protecting her daughter's future. It was irresistible. I watched the greed light up behind her eyes. In her mind, she was about to have the most profitable week of her life. Remove me at the gala, seize the estate, and pocket a private $15 million brand on the side. She hugged the portfolio to her chest and thanked me for my generosity, and she floated out of the office. The moment the door clicked, the frail woman vanished. I sat up straight, swept the prescription bottle into the bin, and adjusted my collar. The carrot had been swallowed whole. 20 minutes later, Priya's feed lit up. Vivian was in her car on a conference call with Marcus and Camille, breathlessly relaying her triumph, mocking my trembling hands, my generosity, my supposed confusion. Marcus laughed. Vivian squealed about the profits, but Camille went quiet. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and calculating. "Stop celebrating," she said, "and think. If Hartwell guarantees that loan, the board reviews the deal. They'll audit it. They'll want a cut for taking the risk. And if any of those old sharks on the board start digging into a separate holding company..." She let it hang. "They might find Meridian." The line went silent. "We cut Hartwell out entirely," Camille said. "We finance Solara ourselves. We keep 100%, and no board ever looks at our books." Marcus balked. How could they secure $15 million without the estate backing it? Camille laughed at him. She reminded him of the wealth already sitting in the Meridian shell, and of the mansion I had bought them, free and clear, as a wedding gift. Take a private mortgage against the house. Use Meridian, which looked on paper like a wildly profitable consultancy, as the corporate co-guarantor. Combine the two, and they could fund it independently. It was reckless beyond belief. It was building a tower on quicksand. If anything went wrong with Solara, they would personally owe $15 million they could never repay, and lose the house on top of it. But their greed was total. Vivian cheered. Marcus, obedient as ever, agreed. They praised Camille's genius. I listened to all three of them laughing, and I felt a cold, quiet satisfaction. I had handed them a rope. Camille had eagerly tied it into a noose for the whole family. Over the next 48 hours, they moved fast. Vivian went to a predatory private lender, high interest, few questions. She mortgaged the mansion to the rafters. Camille bound Meridian as co-guarantor, submitting the shell's fabricated statements as proof of health. They were moving so quickly, so blinded by imagined millions, that not one of them read the acquisition file to the end. If they had, they would have found what I already knew. Daniel laid it out for me the morning of the gala, in my study before dawn. Solara Coast Cellars was not a jewel. It was a corpse in a beautiful dress. 6 weeks earlier, an independent lab had confirmed that 3 of Solara's flagship vintages, already on shelves in 30 states, were contaminated with a banned agricultural compound from a supplier's tainted additive. A mandatory national recall was days from becoming public. Worse, 2 class action lawsuits had already been quietly filed by consumers, and the state licensing board had opened proceedings to pull Solara's production permit entirely. Whoever owned Solara when the recall went public would inherit all of it. The recall costs, the lawsuits, the regulatory penalties, and a brand whose name was about to become poison on every shelf in the country. The $15 million asset was in truth a $15 million liability with no floor. How bad? I asked. The recall and the 2 suits alone are estimated north of $15 million, Daniel said. And product liability of this kind can't be wiped out in a simple bankruptcy. Whoever signed for Solara owns the graveyard. I closed the folder. Vivian believed she had stolen a $15 million brand. In reality, she had mortgaged her home to buy a poisoned one. And by using Meridian as co-guarantor, she had chained the shell company and every crime inside it directly to that debt. They wanted 100%, I said, so they cut Hartwell out. In their rush to rob me, they built a wall that protects my estate from every bit of the fallout. They took all the risk themselves. Precisely, Daniel said. If you'd let Hartwell guarantee it, the estate would owe the $15 million. Instead, you convinced her to protect the deal from you. Her greed did the rest. When the lender realizes the collateral is worthless, they'll call the loan, seize the mansion, and freeze their accounts. And when the state opens Meridian's books to collect, they'll find the embezzlement, the fake invoices, the offshore transfers. Everything, all at once. I let him dig his own grave. Now I only had to hand him the shovel in public. The anniversary gala was held under a great white pavilion on the south lawn, the vines gold in the low autumn light. 300 guests, the full board. Every distributor and grower and old rival I'd known for half a century. I arrived in a dress that hung a little loose on purpose, and I moved slowly, letting my gaze drift, letting the rumors Vivian had so carefully planted do their work. I could feel the pity in the room. Good. Pity is the easiest thing in the world to weaponize. Vivian took the small stage after dinner, Marcus and Camille glowing at the front table. She began with a tribute, my 50 years, my sacrifices, the empire I'd built from 11 acres. Her voice was warm and thick with fabricated love. She called me not just her founder but her hero. Then the tone shifted to sorrow. She told 300 people that it broke her heart to say it, but the family had watched, these last months, a devastating decline. She described my confusion, my forgotten names, my trouble with the numbers. She said she had tried to protect my dignity for as long as she could. And then she reached into a folder and drew out the forged evaluation. She had certified copies passed to every board member at the front tables. She wiped a single perfect tear, and she formally asked the board to honor the trust's incapacity clause, to transfer full control of Hartwell estate and guardianship of me to her. Tonight, the pavilion went silent. 300 faces turned toward me, waiting for the confused old woman to weep or shout or crumble. I did none of those things. I stood up slowly and I smiled, a real one. It rippled confusion through the room. Then I walked, steady and unhurried, up onto the stage beside my daughter, and I asked the sound technician for the microphone. "Thank you, Vivian," I said, and my voice carried to the very back of the tent, clear, strong, and entirely in command. That was a beautiful performance. Before the board votes on my mind, I think they should meet the doctor who examined it. I lifted a hand toward the back of the pavilion, and the flaps parted. Daniel walked in first. Behind him came 2 agents from the State Financial Crimes Unit, badges out. And between them, pale and sweating and clutching a folder like a shield, came a man the guests had never met but whose signature was on every copy in their hands. Dr. Alan Reeve. The murmur that went through that tent was like wind through the vines. Daniel took the microphone and explained it plainly. Dr. Reeve was present under a plea agreement. Investigators had intercepted communications proving the evaluation in every guest's hands was a forgery, bought and paid for through a shell company. To avoid the maximum penalty, the doctor had agreed to testify, and in his final meeting with Camille to wear a wire. The pavilion erupted. Marcus was on his feet. Vivian stood frozen at my side, the color gone from her face, her mouth opening and closing without sound. One of the agents took the microphone. He told the room that the unit had been tracking a long-running embezzlement operation run through the estate's operations office. Nearly $1 million siphoned through fake consulting fees into offshore accounts. That very afternoon, they had executed search warrants on Meridian Cellar Group and on Vivian and Marcus's residence. Then Daniel delivered the last blow, calmly, to the whole room. He explained that just 3 days earlier, the vice president of Hartwell Estate had used embezzled funds and a mortgage on her own home to independently acquire Solara Coast Cellars, a brand that would, within the week, become the subject of the largest wine recall in the state's history. He made it clear, for the board's benefit, that because Vivian had deliberately structured the deal to cut Hartwell out and keep the profits for herself, the estate carried none of the liability. She and Meridian carried all of it. Vivian's knees gave. She sat down hard in her chair, and then the doors at the side of the pavilion burst open one more time, and Camille and Marcus's own celebration arrived. Camille sailed in holding a chilled bottle of champagne, a triumphant smile already on her face. She'd been waiting in the house for the text that said the board had voted. She saw the agents. She saw Dr. Reeve. The bottle slipped from her hands and shattered on the flagstones, champagne spreading across her shoes. I stepped to the edge of the stage and looked down at the three of them. The evaluation was a forgery, I said. A cheap trick by people too small to build anything of their own. But the $15 million in debt you signed for on Tuesday, that is very, very real. The mansion was foreclosed this morning. Your accounts are frozen, and when the state opens Meridian's books to collect, they will find every dollar you took from me. Vivian slid from her chair to her knees on the stage and reached for me, sobbing, begging me to use the estate's wealth to undo it, to save her, to save the house. You're my mother, she cried. You have to protect me, we're family. I looked down at her with a calm I did not have to fake. You forfeited the right to call me family, I said. The moment you booked me a bed in a locked room and toasted to my disappearance with my own wine. The agent stepped forward. Camille was screaming about her reputation. Marcus was silent, gray. The handcuffs closed with a sound I will remember for the rest of my life. Camille, Vivian, Marcus. I watched the last of them escorted across the gold lawn to the cruisers waiting at the gate, past 300 guests who did not make a sound. When the taillights disappeared down the drive, Daniel came to stand beside me at the edge of the pavilion. I told him what I wanted, and he wrote it all down. I disinherited Vivian, fully and permanently. I restructured the estate so that a controlling share went into a trust owned by the people who had actually built Hartwell with me. The cellar master who'd been with me 30 years, the vineyard crews, the office staff who never once padded a number. And I set aside a large portion of my fortune to fund something new. Scholarships and seed grants for young people with dirt under their nails, and no inheritance to fall back on. The kind of ambition that has to be earned, because it is the only kind I have ever trusted. Then I walked back up to the house alone, and I opened the 50-year library bottle, the twin of the one they'd wasted at that restaurant, and I poured a single glass on the terrace, where the first vines still grow. I am 71 years old. I am tonight entirely alone in a house I built with my own hands. I lost my only daughter, not to death but to a disease called greed, which is worse because you have to watch it take them while they smile at you. A weaker woman might have wept for the family she thought she had. But I stood on that terrace, looking out over 50 years of vines going gold in the dusk, and I felt no grief. I had cut a spreading rot out of my life before it could reach the roots. I had protected the thing I love. And the air, for the first time in a year, was clean. Blood does not guarantee loyalty. Family is never a reason to tolerate betrayal. We spend our lives sacrificing so our children will inherit our values along with our wealth, and we pray that they do. But when greed poisons the heart, the kindest thing you can do is stop being the safety net. Sometimes love means letting people fall all the way into the consequences they built for themselves. Protect your peace. Guard what you spent a lifetime earning. And never ever let anyone mistake your generosity for weakness. You owe yourself the respect they refuse to give you. If this story reminded you that patience and clear eyes will always outlast greed, leave a like and tell me in the comments. Would you have called the authorities that first night, or would you have set the trap? I read everyone.